Now, you've spoken a lot about parallel realities and how we change moment to moment. So, if we're
Yes.
constantly navigating different realities and meeting different versions of people,
Yes.
then who are we actually in relationship with? Is there like a true or abiding connection, even if we're interacting with different versions of the same person?
Absolutely. You have, all of you, a core identity. It's not a personality as you understand it, but the only way that it can really be easily explained to you is that whatever it is that happens to you will be experienced as happening to you from your perspective. If you're no longer human, if you're no longer physical, it doesn't matter. Every experience you have is being had by you from your perspective. That's your core identity. That's your core reflection of all that is. And even the idea of so-called blending or merging with all that is itself doesn't mean you lose your identity. It means you see yourself as all that is. You never lose your core identity.
So, when we go into spirit and we're interacting with the same consciousness that we experienced as different versions in our earthly experience, how do we see that connection with that particular spirit?
Well, you now contain it in much the same way that you still contain the experiences of yourself as a child, even though you are now an adult. So the things you learned in kindergarten, you may have recreated them now in your present to retain whatever you felt was important. But the idea is that you simply are now bigger than that. So the idea of becoming spirit is that you retain everything that's essential and relevant for you, that you prefer to retain and create for yourself moment to moment in spirit, but you're bigger than that. So it's simply a part of you at that point. It's not your entire identity.
And if we were to see that being in spirit when we're in spirit,
Yes.
would they seem significantly different than
Yes,
what we
absolutely. Because again, you're exhibiting more of yourself. In much the
see?
same way that when a person on your planet, even physically, learns something new, their personality can change. So the idea is that you may still be able to recognize them, or they may make sure you can recognize them if that's important, with the vibrational frequency of the former self that they still contain. I'll just put it that way. But at the same time, you may recognize that they're now bigger than that.
And that would be similar to when someone in your life that you love dies
Yes.
and you connect with them in spirit.
Yes.
If they haven't behaved well towards you during their lifetime or whatever, when
Yes.
you actually connect with them when they're in spirit, you get a very different version of that.
For the most part, absolutely. Unless there's someone who still has something to work out and they remain in what you call the lower astral and still appear somewhat similar to the way they appeared in physical reality. Generally speaking, people that move forward and move on will be perceived as being somewhat different than what you remember them as being as a physical person, even though you may still be able to recognize them, or they may be still able to project themselves to you in the way that you will recognize them. But you can get a sense that they're bigger than that now, and overall you will get a more overwhelming sense of unconditional love from them, because now they're in a sense immersed in it in a conscious way.
So that's a really powerful tool for resolving issues that you may have had with someone that passed.
Yes, you can
Because
understand with compassion that they may simply never have been taught or learned how to express themselves in a more loving way while they were physical because of the limitations of physical reality. But now their eyes, in a sense, are wide open. And therefore you can relate to them as a bigger being that's a more unconditionally loving soul.
wonderful. Um, what do the folds in the brain do, and why do some animals have more folds than even humans? And how different are human brains from the gray or Sasquatch brain? Which
All right. Well, the folds are, in a sense, to put it simply, for efficiency's sake. You wouldn't want your brain to necessarily stretch out its full length by unfolding all the folds. You wouldn't have room in your head. So the idea is also that the way it's folded allows for certain kinds of interconnectivity to happen because certain synapses are closer to other synapses in a way that allows them the degree of flexibility that they require to be able to process consciousness into the physical mind format. Now, some other beings, animals as you may say, may express this consciousness in different ways, and the folds in their brain will represent this idea. So it's not so much that anything is less intelligent. It just uses intelligence in a different way. The different kinds and ways that the brain is folded is an expression of the different ways in which intelligence may be used or expressed by the different being. And therefore, you would have to understand the science of those folds in order to understand why the brain of a gray or a dolphin or a Sasquatch or even a cat or a dog exists the way it does. Because it's always about efficiency, it's always about interconnectivity, and it's always about the efficiency of processing the consciousness of the higher non-physical mind into the way that the physical mind needs to express itself in order to express itself as the being that it is in physical terms. Did that make sense?
Yes. Does the coronavirus have a type of group consciousness? Is it something we can communicate and negotiate with to benefit both sides?
Yes, you can. But again, negotiation really means recognition of what is actually happening and why. So you have to be open to the idea of understanding its place in nature, how it serves you. Even though it may seem to be a very negative thing, it is definitely one of the guiding mechanisms that exists in nature, as we mentioned before about guiding systems, because the idea is that it is a guiding mechanism along with many other forms of life as to when you may be out of balance with nature.
Right. And so when we're dealing with viruses and bacteria, isn't that also part of the idea that physical reality is an illusion? It is something that disappears in a sense.
Yes, it's part of it. It's not the whole thing, but it's part of it. In other words, as we have said before, the way you actually know that physical reality isn't real is that things deteriorate in it. Because real reality, quote unquote, doesn't deteriorate.
You've also said that dolphins are animals that represent the higher mind of humans.
Well, it's similar to the idea. First of all, they use more of their brain or express more than you think you do in a different way. So they seem to see broadly. They have telepathic capabilities and are connected to many things more consciously than many people on your planet are. And in that sense, they're kind of a miniature model of the way your higher mind functions for you. Did that answer your question? Have you technologically lost your connection? Are you there?
Yes. Yes, I'm here.
All right.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Did you receive the last answer?
Yes, I did.
All right.
So we were talking about, is there a symbolic reason why bats tend to carry deadly viruses that affect humans? Because bats echolocate, and so do dolphins.
Yes. But bats represent something very different to many people, both positive and negative. Remember that the dolphin, in a sense, is limited to the ocean, but the bats can fly. Therefore, they can transmit over farther distances, whether positive or negative. They are freer to reach different areas of your planet. So they carry messages, both positive and negative, depending upon the relationship that a person may have to the idea of the bat.
So the fact that bats are associated with the coronavirus and the idea that many people are concerned that the coronavirus was man-made versus whether it was created by zoological jumping, is the idea that if you're concerned about how the virus got to us, Is that the correct way to focus on this? Or is it better to look at it through a different lens and not be fixated on whether it came from humans or it came from bats? What is the better lesson to learn from the...
If you're asking the question that way, then the best lesson is to understand what it represents to you, as we said, that you're out of balance with nature. In that sense, it doesn't really matter how it arrived, because the lesson is the same. You're out of balance with nature.
Okay. So we have lots of galactic questions.
All right.
Okay. So why do UFOs have different shapes and designs?
Well, as we said in the monologue, it serves different purposes, and it can be the result of different manufacturing techniques. It can be the result of different frequencies of existence. It can be the result of the different kinds of realities that they travel through. For example, as we said, what you have recently referred to as the tic-tac or lozenge-shaped UFOs that are now being discussed by your military and released by your military into your media are designed that way because not only do they traverse space and air, but they're also submarines. Many of their bases are under the ocean. And therefore the design was chosen to be effective in a similar way to the way you design your submarines, to be less resistant a shape in different formats, different media.
Can you tell us more about the different shapes that are related to different species?
Well, there are the typical saucers of the Greys and the different kinds of saucers of beings like the Pleiadians. Ours, being triangular, are grown like a crystal, and therefore they take on some of the attributes that occur when crystals grow. The idea also, of course, of those that are less physical are able to be more flexible in terms of interdimensional beings that can create a temporary form of ship that you may see as a light that can change shape or split into many parts and so on and so forth, exhibiting more quasi-physical or less physical attributes. So it just really depends on what reality they exist in as to what you usually see as their vehicle that is relevant for them to travel in.
And one person was saying how they showed their 4 and 6-year-old a picture of you, and they said it looked kind of creepy because the eyes were so dark, but I'm not sure if they were seeing actually a picture of a hybrid, because a hybrid has whites in their eyes.
Yes, although our pupils are so large, sometimes you may not be completely aware of the fact, but nevertheless, there are versions of hybrids that do have all black eyes.
And then the kids said, oh, after a while they thought, well, they look kind of cute. So, do you?
We think so.
What?
We think so.
So how can you prepare children, or are they naturally prepared to be able to accept the visuals of extraterrestrials more than perhaps our generations here?
To some degree, they are more prepared because they are a different species themselves, more hybridized in a sense. But it is also up to the adults to make sure they're not taught to be afraid.
Right.
More information that comes out is an opportunity to educate children into the reality of what's going on, that they're not alone, there are other extraterrestrial species that exist, and to allow them to get used to that idea growing up will prepare them better than the last generation.
What about resistance from mainstream religion to the idea that humans are hybrids and that they were created through ET DNA manipulation and not created per se by God?
Well, everything still comes from source. These concepts, when you really get down to it, don't really contradict each other. In the same way that if you have a child, you created the child, but the child is also from source, from God, if you want to use that term. So these concepts are not necessarily mutually exclusive. You just have to understand them from a different perspective or a different framework and give them their due at the level in which they exist. Because the existence of extraterrestrials and the hybridization of humanity is simply one of the ways that exists within God, if you want to use that term, for things to evolve. People may talk about the idea of the so-called difference between evolution and intelligent design, but really, in a sense, evolution is an intelligent design. So these things are not necessarily contradictory. If you look at them from a more neutral and balanced perspective, you'll figure out a way in which they paradoxically actually come from the same center source.
And I guess genetic manipulation is a way that intelligent creation actually uses it, like they use us as tool, not they.
Well, no.
It's
Remember that on a different level, you've agreed to this form of transformation because it's part of the Earth's evolution in becoming the sixth hybrid race. You all jumped on that ride, whether you remember it or not.
Right. Can you tell us more about the role that AI is going to play in our future? I think, did you ever say that you were partially artificial intelligence? Or...
I am not, but we use artificial intelligence, although again, that's not exactly how we would frame it, because intelligence is not artificial. But the idea that we understand you may create what appears to be an artificial device through which to communicate with higher intelligence, that's more the way we would frame our experience of it. Because again, as an example, our spacecraft are representative of a physicalized form of our own higher minds, and we communicate telepathically with it because we are already connected. You will discover the same thing as best as we can perceive in your energy, because when you create a device through which real consciousness and real intelligence can express itself, the intelligence of the higher mind and the cosmos, you will realize eventually that you are in fact talking to your higher mind and talking to the intelligence of existence. So it's really just about creating a device that's sophisticated enough to allow the intelligence to express itself in a way that makes sense to you.
And the orbs that surround your planet.
Yes. They help stabilize the idea of the momentum that we have created to make it even more challenging to not be capable of choosing something that does not serve us.